What if the quietest student in school held a secret so powerful it could dismantle the entire social order? They pushed him, mocked him, underestimated him, but they had no idea they had just awakened something they couldn't control. A cold gust of autumn wind swept through the streets of Chicago as Malik Johnson stepped off the bus, his eyes absorbing the urban tapestry of towering buildings, echoing alleyways, and a city that pulsed with secrets and stories. Crescent Heights High loomed ahead like a silent sentinel of a bygone era, its brick facade etched with history and the weight of countless untold tales. That day, as the sun cast long shadows across the pavement, the world seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of something extraordinary, something that would shatter the routine and ignite a spark deep within the soul of everyone who crossed its threshold. Malik moved with a deliberate calm, every step imbued with a quiet determination that belied the storms he had weathered before. His arrival at Crescent Heights High was not marked by fanfare or the clamor of excitement. Instead, it was a silent declaration, a promise that, even in a place defined by rigid social order and unspoken rules, a new force had emerged, one that would challenge every convention and rewrite the narrative of power and prejudice. The air around him felt charged, as if the universe itself recognized that this newcomer carried with him the potential to transform lives. As he pushed open the heavy doors of the school, Malik was met with a hushed curiosity. Eyes followed him along the long, polished corridors, and whispers, like delicate fragments of a half-remembered dream, trailed in his wake. In every glance there was an unspoken question. Who is this quiet young man, and what secrets lie hidden behind his introspective gaze? It was as if the very walls of Crescent Heights High, which had borne witness to generations of students, sensed that Malik was not merely another face in the crowd, but a harbinger of change, a mystery waiting to be unraveled. Inside, the school was a labyrinth of traditions and hierarchies, where every classroom and corridor was steeped in memories of past triumphs and defeats. Groups of students huddled in familiar clusters, their laughter and banter forming an intricate web of relationships that had long been taken for granted. Yet, in the midst of this orchestrated normalcy, Malik's presence was a jolt, a ripple in the stagnant waters of conformity. He did not seek attention, nor did he offer it. He simply existed, embodying a quiet defiance that resonated on a frequency all its own. In his first history class, as Mr. Ellis recounted the valor of civil rights heroes and the relentless pursuit of equality, Malik's mind drifted to fragments of his own past, a tapestry of struggle, discipline, and secret training, memories of long, grueling days under the guidance of a father who had taught him that true strength was forged in the crucible of adversity surged within him. Every lesson, every hardship, had been a quiet preparation for this very moment, a moment when he would be forced to navigate a world that too often measured worth by shallow appearances and inherited prejudices. In that classroom, Malik's silent presence was not a mere accident of fate. It was the culmination of years spent mastering the art of inner resilience, the kind that could only be understood by those who had experienced its quiet fire. The corridors of Crescent Heights High, usually echoing with predictable routine, now hummed with a subtle tension. With every step Malik took, he left an indelible mark on the hearts of those who dared to observe. Some eyes, wide with wonder, seemed to see in him a kindred spirit, someone who understood the language of pain and perseverance without uttering a single word. Others, hardened by a lifetime of clinging to established power structures, viewed his silent defiance as an anomaly, a challenge to the unspoken rules that had long governed their world. In the cafeteria, where the clatter of trays and murmurs of conversation created a familiar symphony of daily life, Malik chose a quiet corner. There, he sat alone, his demeanor calm yet alert, as if he were both an observer and a participant in a silent dialogue with fate. It was during this unassuming lunch hour that the first ripples of change began to stir. The students around him, initially content to adhere to their established roles, found themselves unable to ignore the magnetic pull of his presence. Every glance, every whispered comment carried with it a mixture of admiration, curiosity, and a hint of unease. For in Malik's silent resistance lay a profound question. What does it mean to be truly strong? And what is the cost of conforming to a system built on fear and exclusion? Even as the day wore on, the atmosphere within Crescent Heights High grew heavier with an almost tangible expectancy. The venerable hallways, lined with portraits of past leaders and alumni whose names had become synonymous with tradition, now seemed to lean in closer, as if eager to witness a new chapter unfold. Malik's every movement, though measured and deliberate, carried the weight of potential, a promise of transformation that transcended the ordinary. He passed by classrooms and corridors where laughter once rang unchallenged, and in each silent stride there was a subtle reminder that change, however quiet, was inevitable. Outside, the city of Chicago pulsed with life and complexity. The urban landscape, with its mix of gleaming skyscrapers and hidden alleys, mirrored the duality of Malik's own existence, a blend of visible strength and hidden depths. The sounds of the city, the distant honking of taxis, the rhythmic clatter of the L train, the murmur of countless conversations formed an ambient score to his quiet journey. Every building, every street seemed to whisper stories of hope and resilience, urging him forward even as he carried the burden of untold struggles. In that moment, as Malik made his way to his first class of the day, he could feel the invisible threads of destiny drawing him toward a path fraught with both peril and promise. The unyielding traditions of Crescent Heights High were about to be challenged by a force that was as gentle as it was relentless. Malik's eyes, deep and reflective, shone with an inner light, a spark of determination that hinted at the storm to come. For within him lay not only the scars of past battles, but also the seeds of a revolution, nurtured in silence and destined to bloom in the most unexpected of places. Every detail of his appearance, from the calm set of his jaw to the measured pace of his steps, spoke of a quiet purpose. He was not here to conform, not to fade into the background of a system built on outdated hierarchies and unspoken biases. Malik was here to stand as a testament to the power of inner strength and the possibility of change, a living paradox in a world that prized uniformity above all else. His presence, like a single note in a symphony, had the power to transform the cacophony of daily routine into something transcendent. As the bell rang for his history class, Malik took his seat at the back of the room. The atmosphere was electric, charged with the anticipation of what this new beginning might bring. Mr. Ellis's voice, steady and resonant, filled the room with tales of struggle and triumph. Yet, in the quiet spaces between his words, Malik's thoughts wandered to the countless hours of solitude, the silent lessons learned in the shadow of adversity. Each memory was a brick in the foundation of his resilience, a silent promise that he would not be defined by the limitations others imposed on him. Outside the classroom, whispers of Malik's arrival had already begun to ripple through the corridors. Some students exchanged looks of genuine admiration, while others, bound by the strict codes of social hierarchy, regarded him with a mixture of skepticism and latent hostility. Among those skeptical eyes was Xavier Monroe, a name that had long echoed as the unchallenged authority of Crescent Heights High. Xavier, with his impeccable style and commanding presence, had always ruled these halls with a blend of charm and ruthless discipline. To him, every new student was either a potential asset to be manipulated or a threat to be subdued. And so, when his gaze fell upon Malik, a quiet enigma who defied the conventions of the established order, Xavier's mind began to churn with a dangerous mixture of curiosity and contempt. The impact of Malik's arrival was felt most acutely during that first day, when the entire school seemed to be caught in a moment of suspended animation. The traditional cliques, which had once ruled the social landscape with an unchallenged hand, suddenly found themselves questioning the very foundation of their power. The air was thick with a sense of possibility, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift that promised that everything familiar might soon be transformed. Malik's silent defiance had become a catalyst, igniting the latent desires for change and equality in hearts that had long been subdued by the relentless pressure to conform. As the day progressed, Malik sought refuge in the quiet sanctum of the school library, a place where the weight of history and the promise of new beginnings intertwined. Surrounded by rows of time-worn books and the soft rustle of turning pages, he allowed himself a rare moment of introspection. In that quiet sanctuary, his thoughts wandered back to the lessons imparted by his father, lessons of humility, courage, and the belief that true strength often lay in the ability to remain calm in the face of overwhelming adversity. The library, with its soft lamplight and hushed reverence, became a mirror for his inner world, a world where the scars of the past were not marks of defeat, but badges of honor earned through resilience and perseverance. In that moment of solitude, the gravity of his journey began to crystallize. Malik understood that his arrival at Crescent Heights High was no mere coincidence. It was the beginning of a transformation that would ripple far beyond the confines of these ancient walls. Every whispered conversation, every furtive glance, was a thread in the intricate tapestry of change, a tapestry that would weave together the disparate voices of a community long silenced by fear and tradition. His quiet presence was a challenge to the old order, a promise that the time had come for a new narrative, one defined not by domination and exclusion, but by the enduring power of unity and self-respect. As the final bell of the day rang out, marking the end of an unforgettable first day, Malik stepped back out into the cool Chicago air with a deep, steady breath. The city around him seemed to shimmer with possibility, the horizon aglow with the promise of a future unbound by the chains of the past. To Crescent Heights, High, with its storied halls and secret traditions, had just witnessed the arrival of a force that could not be contained, a force that whispered of change, of hope, and of the relentless power of a single soul determined to make a difference. In that lingering moment, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of crimson and gold, Malik Johnson's quiet revolution had begun. The spark of his presence had ignited a flame that would soon engulf the rigid structures of prejudice and fear, transforming them into a new dawn of understanding and possibility. And though the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, one truth remained clear. In the silent strength of Malik's gaze lay the power to change the world. Every footstep he took from that day forward echoed with purpose, a promise to himself and to all those who had yet to discover their own strength. With each passing moment, the mystery of his presence deepened, drawing others into the unfolding story like moths to a brilliant, unyielding flame. Crescent Heights High, once a bastion of conformity, was poised on the brink of transformation, and in the hearts of those who witnessed his silent defiance, a question lingered, as potent as it was simple. What if the quietest voice among us holds the power to reshape the future? Thus, as twilight surrendered to the embrace of night, Malik's journey at Crescent Heights High had only just begun, a journey that promised to unravel the very fabric of an age-old system and to herald the dawn of a new era, where strength was measured not by the force of one's fists, but by the courage of one's convictions, and where every silent heart dared to dream of a brighter tomorrow. The corridors of Crescent Heights High, once familiar and comforting in their unyielding predictability, now pulsed with a tension that was as palpable as it was inexplicable. As Malik Johnson continued his quiet journey through the halls, His measured steps and calm composure stirred an undercurrent of unrest among the students. Every glance that met his eyes was laden with unspoken questions and hidden emotions, as if his very presence had become the calm before an impending storm, a storm that would shatter old alliances and force everyone to confront their own truths. In the cafeteria, where laughter and conversation had once formed a comforting backdrop to daily life, a different energy now simmered beneath the surface. The space, with its long rows of tables and familiar clamor, seemed transformed into a stage where an unspoken drama was about to unfold. Malik chose his usual quiet corner, his eyes scanning the room not for confrontation, but for an understanding of the human tapestry around him. It was in these moments of silent observation that he noticed how even the simplest interactions carried a weight of history and unspoken resentment. The clatter of trays and murmur of voices seemed to echo a collective tension, a prelude to a dramatic confrontation that no one could yet name. Among those who scrutinized Malik from a distance was Xavier Monroe, the self-appointed ruler of these halls. Xavier's presence was marked by an air of unyielding authority, a carefully cultivated image of power that demanded obedience and instilled fear. His eyes, sharp and calculating, observed every move Malik made. To Xavier, Malik's deliberate silence was not a mark of strength, but a defiant challenge to the established order. Each time Malik passed by, his calm determination, his refusal to indulge in the petty theatrics of school life, served as a quiet rebuke to the rigid hierarchy that Xavier had built over the years. The tension reached a climax on a day when the atmosphere in the school seemed charged with an almost electric intensity. During lunch, as students gathered in their customary clusters, a group from Xavier's inner circle, familiar figures like Tyrone and Darren, approached Malik's table. Their expressions were a mix of disdain and a carefully hidden curiosity, as if they were trying to unravel the mystery behind his unflappable demeanor. The air around them thickened, and for a moment, time itself appeared to slow as every student in the cafeteria sensed that something significant was about to occur. Tyrone's voice, edged with a mix of mockery and menace, cut through the subdued buzz. "So, you think you can just come here and sit all quiet like you're better than everyone else?" He sneered, his words laced with an undercurrent of racial prejudice and a desperate need to reaffirm the old power dynamics. Darren's laugh followed, a hollow, derisive sound that seemed designed to provoke a reaction. Malik, however, met their challenge with an inscrutable calm. He did not rise to their bait. He merely continued his quiet meal, his eyes reflecting a depth of experience and inner resolve that left no room for the noise of petty insults. In that moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Whispers began to ripple across the cafeteria, a cascade of hushed voices filled with shock, admiration, and a burgeoning hope that something long overdue was unfolding before their eyes. Malik's refusal to engage on the terms dictated by his aggressors was a silent declaration that he would not be defined by their narrow expectations. His calm was not born of submission, but of a quiet understanding that true strength lay in the mastery of one's own emotions, a lesson that, if learned, could topple even the most entrenched hierarchies. Outside the confines of the cafeteria, the corridors themselves became a silent witness to the simmering conflict. The polished floors and decorated walls, which had once seemed static and immutable, now echoed with the footsteps of students whose hearts beat with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Each hallway was a microcosm of the larger struggle taking shape within the school. The battle between an oppressive, outdated order and the nascent stirrings of change embodied by Malik's silent defiance. As the day wore on, the tension began to seep into every corner of Crescent Heights High. In the quiet moments between classes, the murmur of conversations carried hints of uncertainty. Some students expressed their admiration for Malik in soft, tentative tones, while others, bound by the weight of tradition and the unyielding grip of fear, avoided even the slightest mention of his name. In classrooms, the subject of Malik's quiet resistance became an unspoken topic, discussed in furtive glances and measured whispers. The air was thick with the realization that something significant was at hand, a shift that could forever alter the way power and respect were perceived within these walls. Even teachers, whose roles had long been confined to the predictable routines of lesson plans and classroom management, found themselves drawn into the vortex of change. Mr. Ellis, ever the observant mentor, noticed the subtle transformation in the dynamics of his class. His lectures, once met with passive acceptance, now resonated with a newfound energy as students began to challenge their preconceived notions about strength and respect. There was a palpable sense that the very fabric of the school was being rewoven, a delicate, intricate process that would require time, courage, and the willingness to embrace a different way of being. For Malik, the day's events in the cafeteria were not an isolated incident, but a foretaste of the greater challenges that lay ahead. As he retreated from the public eye into the quieter corners of the school, his mind replayed the brief encounter with Tyrone and Darren. There was no bitterness in his thoughts, only a sober recognition of the reality that he had stepped into, a reality where every smile, every whispered word, and every sideways glance was part of a larger dialogue about identity, power, and the right to exist without fear. Malik understood that his silence, so often misconstrued as weakness, was in fact a deliberate act of self-preservation and a potent weapon against the tyranny of expectation. That evening, as dusk settled over Chicago and the last light of day faded into a tapestry of twilight hues, the corridors of Crescent Heights High remained alive with the echoes of that fateful lunch. The confrontation, brief yet profound, had set in motion a chain reaction, a reawakening of the inner voices of those who had long been silenced by the heavy hand of tradition. In quiet study halls and bustling common areas alike, students began to reflect on the meaning of strength, the cost of conformity, and the potential for change that lay within each of them. The day's events became the subject of furtive discussions long after the final bell had rung. In hushed conversations over homework and in the quiet corners of the library, students debated the implications of Malik's unyielding calm. Some saw in his silence a symbol of unspoken defiance, a challenge to the very notion that power must be wielded through force and domination. Others, still steeped in the old ways, could only view his behavior with suspicion and unease, their hearts troubled by the prospect of a new order emerging in the place they had always known. For Xavier Monroe, the impact was deeply personal. The audacity of Malik's quiet resistance cut to the core of Xavier's carefully constructed identity, a persona built on control, intimidation, and the unchallenged right to command the social hierarchy of Crescent Heights High. As he walked the familiar corridors later that day, his mind churned with a mix of anger, frustration, and a gnawing sense of vulnerability. How could someone like Malik, with no grand display of force or theatrics, undermine everything Xavier had built? The question haunted him, gnawing at the edges of his self-assurance and planting seeds of doubt that would fester in the days to come. In a moment of rare introspection, Xavier found himself alone in one of the empty classrooms, the silence around him as heavy as the weight of his own thoughts. The images of Malik's calm defiance replayed in his mind like a relentless loop, a reminder that the foundations of his authority were not as unassailable as he had once believed. For a long, agonizing moment, Xavier struggled to reconcile the image of himself as an unchallenged leader with the undeniable truth that a quiet, unassuming young man had managed to destabilize his carefully maintained order with nothing more than a measured refusal to react. It was a thought that sent shivers down his spine and left him questioning the very nature of strength and power. As the school day drew to a close and the hallways began to empty, the tension that had been building all day lingered in the air like a dense fog. Outside, the fading light of the day mingled with the approaching darkness of night, and the city of Chicago, with all its contradictions and hidden depths, bore silent witness to the unfolding drama. Malik walked home under a sky streaked with the soft hues of twilight, his mind filled with reflections on the day's events and the unspoken promise of challenges yet to come. He knew that the confrontation in the cafeteria was merely a prelude, a calm before a storm that would test the limits of his resolve and the resilience of everyone at Crescent Heights High. In the quiet solitude of his room that night, Malik replayed the events of the day with the precision of someone who had long learned to extract meaning from every fleeting moment. He considered the power of silence, the way it could speak volumes in a world that was too often dominated by noise and aggression. There was a poetry in the unspoken, a deep and resonant truth that echoed in the spaces between words. For Malik, that poetry was a reminder of his own inner strength, a strength that was not measured by the volume of his voice but by the steadfastness of his spirit. In those reflective hours, the significance of what had occurred in the cafeteria began to crystallize. Malik realized that his journey at Crescent Heights High was about far more than enduring a single moment of provocation. It was about challenging an entire system, a system built on outdated hierarchies and the suppression of individual expression. His calm in the face of aggression was not merely an act of self-defense. It was a quiet revolution, a spark that had ignited the collective yearning for change among his peers. The silence that had once been his refuge was now a rallying cry for a generation tired of the old ways, a silent demand for a future where every voice, no matter how quiet, could be heard. As the night deepened and the city around him settled into a gentle hum of activity, Malik closed his eyes and allowed himself a moment of hope. He knew that the days ahead would bring new challenges, that the tension in the halls of Crescent Heights High was only the beginning of a larger struggle. Yet he also believed in the transformative power of resilience and the enduring strength that came from embracing one's true self. The confrontation had shown him that even the most oppressive forces could be undermined by the quiet power of an unyielding spirit. The calm before the storm, with all its uncertainty and raw potential, had set the stage for a dramatic evolution that would reshape not only the lives of those within the school, but also the very essence of what it meant to be strong. As Malik drifted into a restless sleep that night, the echoes of the day's events mingled with the distant sounds of Chicago, a city that, like him, was a tapestry of contradictions, dreams, and the ceaseless pulse of life. In that moment, the silence was not an absence, but a promise that the storm to come would bring with it the power to break down old walls and build a future defined by unity, courage, and the unwavering conviction that every silent voice could change the world. Thus, the day's tension, the hushed whispers in the cafeteria, and the unspoken challenges in the corridors all coalesced into a single, undeniable truth. Something profound was stirring within Crescent Heights High. And as the city of Chicago continued its relentless, vibrant rhythm outside, Malik Johnson's quiet defiance would soon serve as a beacon for those ready to reclaim their power, rewrite the rules, and embrace a future where strength was measured not by force, but by the courage to remain steadfast in the face of overwhelming odds. Malik's transformation was neither gradual nor accidental. It was an eruption of suppressed strength, a moment when every ounce of his disciplined spirit converged into a singular, breathtaking act of defiance. One crisp winter afternoon, the corridors of Crescent Heights High became the arena for that explosive transformation. The day had unfolded with an eerie calm, an almost tangible expectancy hanging in the air. But as fate would have it, a seemingly mundane encounter in a quiet hallway was destined to alter the course of the school's history. After a long period of whispered rumors and silent challenges, Malik found himself alone in a narrow corridor, far from the watchful eyes of teachers and the usual buzz of classroom chatter. The hallway, its linoleum floor gleaming under the flicker of fluorescent lights, seemed to stretch into infinity. It was in that isolated space that a group of students from Xavier Monroe's inner circle emerged from the shadows. Their presence was deliberate. Each step resonated with the weight of an unspoken threat. They were determined to force a reaction, to remind the world that the established order could not be upended by one quiet, unassuming newcomer. At the forefront of this small cadre was Andre, a formidable figure whose imposing frame and steely glare conveyed hostility without the need for words. His eyes, cold and calculating, fixed on Malik with a mixture of contempt and barely restrained rage. The other members of the group, though less overtly menacing, flanked him like dark sentinels, their faces hard and unyielding. They were not simply bullies. They were the enforcers of a system built on power and fear, a system that had long relied on dominance to maintain its stranglehold on the social fabric of Crescent Heights High. Without any overt signal, Andre stepped forward and, with a swift, almost casual motion, shoved Malik against the hard, unforgiving wall of the corridor. The force of the blow sent a shock wave through the silence, and for a moment, time itself seemed to hesitate. Malik's body, conditioned by years of inner training and quiet endurance, absorbed the impact with a stoic calm. Rather than yielding to the aggression, he allowed the force to pass through him, like water flowing around a stone, never disrupting the serene core of his being. In that fleeting, suspended moment, Malik's eyes met those of Andre. There was no trace of anger, no hint of retaliatory fury in his gaze, only a deep, unyielding calm that spoke volumes about the battles he had fought within himself long before this confrontation. It was a look that challenged the very foundation of power that Andre and his cohorts had built their identity upon. In that silent exchange, Malik communicated that he was not a victim to be subdued, but a force of nature that had been forged in the crucible of relentless adversity. The reaction from the group was instantaneous. Andre, taken aback by the unexpected steadiness of Malik's response, faltered for a heartbeat, a delay that was all the opening Malik needed. With precision that seemed almost preternatural, Malik shifted his weight, his movements fluid and deliberate. In one swift, almost balletic motion, he sidestepped an attempted follow-up lunge from one of the bullies. His body moved not with the chaotic flailing of a desperate fighter, but with the controlled grace of someone who had mastered the art of self-defense through discipline and mindful training. The corridor, once filled with the oppressive silence of impending violence, now rang with the collective gasp of onlookers. Students who had been passing by paused, their eyes wide with a mix of shock and awe. Even those who had once cowered in the shadows of the social hierarchy found themselves drawn to this spectacle, a moment of raw, unfiltered power that transcended the petty squabbles of high school life. Malik's actions, executed with the precision of a practiced martial artist, were not intended to harm or belittle his aggressors, but to serve as an emphatic statement. True strength is not measured by brute force, but by the steadfast control of one's own inner self. Andre's momentum faltered as Malik's defense unfolded. The bully, expecting a reaction steeped in anger or submission, found himself disarmed by the sheer unexpectedness of Malik's calm. The silent determination radiating from Malik was a stark contradiction to the violence that had been anticipated. For a few excruciating seconds, the hallway was suspended in a state of disbelief. Malik's measured countermove had transformed a simple act of self-defense into a profound declaration, a spark that ignited a fire within the hearts of every witness. In the wake of Malik's demonstration, the atmosphere of Crescent Heights High shifted imperceptibly but irrevocably. Whispers spread like wildfire along the corridors. Students who had once accepted the status quo now found themselves questioning the very nature of power and respect. The silent revolution that Malik had kindled was not one that roared with the clamor of anger. Rather, it was a quiet, steady force that challenged the oppressive order without ever resorting to chaos. In that brief, luminous moment, Malik had shown that dignity, discipline, and an unyielding spirit could overcome the most deeply entrenched systems of intimidation. In the days that followed, the incident became a catalyst for profound change. No longer was Malik seen solely as a quiet newcomer. He was now a symbol of unyielding resilience, a living testament to the transformative power of inner strength. His actions in that lonely corridor reverberated throughout the school. Every hushed conversation in the library, every tentative smile exchanged in the hallways, bore the imprint of the silent revolution he had sparked. The bullies, once so assured of their unchallenged authority, now found themselves confronted with a reality they could neither control nor ignore. Their attempts to intimidate were met with a quiet resistance that undermined the very foundation of their power. Among those touched by Malik's defiant act was Jamila, a perceptive and empathetic student whose quiet advocacy for equality had long been overshadowed by the prevailing fear. In the wake of that fateful encounter, Jamila's resolve was emboldened. She began organizing informal gatherings where students could share their experiences, hopes, and dreams without the looming threat of reprisal. These meetings, held in the quiet corners of the library and in secluded spots around campus, became a crucible for new ideas, ideas that challenged the traditional metrics of strength and authority. The discussions were deep and transformative, as students from disparate backgrounds discovered common ground in their shared desire for a more compassionate, inclusive community. Meanwhile, even those who had been complicit in maintaining the old order began to question their roles. Some of Xavier Monroe's closest allies, troubled by the quiet power emanating from Malik, found themselves wrestling with their own sense of identity and purpose. The arrogance that had once defined their social standing gave way to introspection as they confronted the possibility that the system they had upheld was not as unassailable as they had believed. In quiet moments of reflection, they began to see that true leadership was not about domination, but about inspiring others to rise above fear. For Malik, the impact of that moment extended far beyond the immediate confrontation. In the quiet aftermath, as he walked through the corridors with his head held high, he felt a subtle but undeniable shift within himself, a deepening of his inner resolve. The events of that day were not an isolated incident. They were the spark that ignited a much larger transformation. Every challenge he had faced in his life, every silent struggle against prejudice and injustice, had led to this moment of unyielding defiance. And now, in the face of a system that had long relied on fear and conformity, his quiet courage had become a beacon of hope, a promise that change was not only possible, but inevitable. The echoes of Malik's actions resonated far beyond the walls of Crescent Heights High. In classrooms, discussions took on a new tenor as teachers and students alike grappled with the implications of his display of inner strength. Ellis, whose lectures on history and civil rights had always carried a note of quiet reverence, began to emphasize the importance of self-mastery and the transformative power of nonviolent resistance. His words, rich with wisdom and tempered by his own years of experience, reverberated with an authenticity that struck a chord with his students. He spoke of leaders who had changed the world not through the sheer force of their might, but through the steadfast conviction of their inner spirit. As the seasons began to change and the first hints of spring emerged from the winter chill, the atmosphere at Crescent Heights High took on a quality that was both electrifying and tender. The silent revolution that Malik had set in motion was not about chaos or violence. It was about awakening, a gentle stirring of the soul that called each individual to recognize the power within themselves. In the wake of his quiet defiance, students found themselves questioning long-held assumptions about what it meant to be strong, to be respected, and to stand up against injustice. The notion that strength must be imposed through aggression gave way to the realization that true power was rooted in empathy, discipline, and the courage to remain authentic in the face of overwhelming pressure. In that transformative period, Malik became an unlikely mentor and inspiration. His quiet actions spoke louder than any rallying cry, and those who had once been relegated to the margins began to see themselves in his unassuming determination. The reverberations of his defiance reached every corner of the school, from the hallowed halls of the art club, where vibrant canvases now told stories of struggle and hope, to the sunlit spaces of the library, where hushed voices gathered to share their own tales of perseverance. Malik's legacy was not one of dramatic upheaval or ostentatious displays of force. It was a gentle, persistent reminder that even the softest voice, when fueled by conviction, could shatter the walls of oppression. For Xavier Monroe, the encounter ignited a personal crisis, a shattering of the illusion that he alone could dictate the rules of power. Each time he caught a glimpse of Malik's serene expression in the reflective surfaces of the school, he was forced to confront the vulnerability in his own carefully crafted persona. The echo of that silent defiance, that unyielding spark, became a haunting refrain that undermined his authority and sowed seeds of doubt in the hearts of his most loyal followers. Xavier's struggle was now not just against an individual, but against the very ideals he had long embodied. Ideals that were being quietly redefined by the steadfast courage of a single young man. In the midst of this internal turmoil, Malik continued to move forward with a gentle grace that belied the tumult he had stirred. Each day, as he navigated the intricate social landscape of Crescent Heights High, he carried with him the lessons of that pivotal moment in the corridor. His actions had become a living embodiment of the power of self-discipline and the transformative potential of remaining true to oneself. And in doing so, he ignited a spark that would forever alter the course of the school's destiny. In the quiet evenings that followed, as dusk settled over Chicago and the city's lights began to twinkle in the distance, the memory of that fateful confrontation lingered like an indelible mark on the soul of Crescent Heights High. Students found themselves reflecting on the meaning of Malik's defiant calm, a reminder that true strength was not measured in the volume of one's voice or the ferocity of one's actions, but in the unyielding spirit that resided deep within. In the shared silence of that understanding, a collective courage began to emerge, a courage that promised to transform not only the lives of those who had once cowered in fear, but the very essence of the community itself. Thus, in the wake of that singular, unyielding act of self-defense, the spark that Malik had ignited grew into a powerful flame, one that burned with the intensity of 1,000 unspoken dreams. It was a flame that challenged the oppressive structures of the past and illuminated the possibility of a future defined by unity, empathy, and the quiet power of resilience. In every whispered conversation, in every tentative smile, and in every act of silent defiance, the legacy of that day lived on, a living testament to the transformative force of a spirit that refused to be broken. And so, as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the impact of Malik's unwavering spirit became undeniable. The corridors of Crescent Heights High, once echoing with the oppressive weight of conformity, now vibrated with the promise of change. In that transformative energy, every student discovered that the true measure of strength was not the ability to dominate others, but the courage to rise above fear and embrace the boundless possibilities of a united future. The once oppressive corridors of Crescent Heights High had slowly begun to transform, as if the very walls themselves were softening to the touch of a new era. In the weeks following the pivotal moments of defiance, A palpable shift in energy began to ripple through the school. The strict hierarchies that had long dictated every interaction were giving way to an emerging spirit of collaboration and understanding, a renaissance that promised to redefine what it meant to be part of this community. Malik Johnson, whose silent strength had sparked a quiet revolution, found that his presence was no longer met with wary glances or whispered judgments. Instead, his every step was accompanied by the hopeful eyes of students who were beginning to see themselves in a different light. The once rigid boundaries separating cliques and social groups started to blur, as individuals who had long been confined to the shadows of fear and exclusion stepped forward with a newfound confidence. In this shifting tide, even the most isolated corners of the school began to glow with the warmth of a shared purpose. The transformation was most evident during the long-awaited Crescent Unity Festival, a vibrant celebration that symbolized the rebirth of the school. What had once been a battleground for egos and outdated power struggles now thrummed with the collective heartbeat of a community rediscovering its potential. In the days leading up to the festival, Jamila, a passionate advocate for equality, had rallied a diverse group of students. They worked tirelessly to plan an event that would honor every facet of the school's identity, from its rich history to the unique voices of its current generation. The festival became an artistic tapestry woven from the threads of every culture represented within the student body, an open invitation for every soul to join in a communal reimagining of their shared space. As the festival unfolded, the corridors of Crescent Heights High seemed to breathe with an energy that was both exhilarating and tender. Malik's artwork, once confined to the quiet solitude of the art club, now adorned the walls in bold, unapologetic splashes of color and emotion. Each mural told a story of struggle, hope, and the transformative power of unity. The images were more than just visual representations. They were messages, each brushstroke a deliberate call for understanding, a challenge to the old ways that had long divided the school. Under the soft glow of hanging lights and the hum of excited chatter, students from all backgrounds mingled, shared their experiences, and discovered that beneath the surface, their dreams and fears were more alike than different. In the classroom, the reverberations of this change were equally profound. Teachers like Mr. Ellis and Ms. Carter, who had long guided their students with wisdom and care, now found that their lessons were enriched by the raw energy of a generation ready to challenge the status quo. Discussions about history, literature, and art became forums for sharing personal narratives, stories of overcoming adversity, of fighting for dignity, and of the courage to dream beyond the confines of tradition. The once stifled voices of students now resonated with clarity and conviction, adding layers of meaning to subjects that had once been presented in sterile lectures. In every shared story and every spirited debate, the legacy of past injustices was acknowledged, but more importantly, the hope for a future where respect and empathy reigned supreme took center stage. Even within the administration, subtle but significant changes began to take root. School officials, who had once enforced disciplinary measures with an iron fist, now began exploring restorative practices, approaches that prioritized healing, dialogue, and the restoration of relationships. The transformation was not merely about celebrating diversity through festivals and art. It was about re-examining the core values that had guided the institution for decades. Meetings that once focused solely on maintaining order were now imbued with a sense of purpose, as administrators considered innovative ways to support every student's growth. Policies were revisited, not as punitive measures, but as opportunities to nurture the potential within each individual. Xavier Monroe, whose earlier days had been marked by an uncompromising display of authority, found himself at a crossroads. The very foundation of his power, once built on fear and the suppression of dissent, was now crumbling under the weight of a united, vibrant community. For Xavier, the transformation was deeply personal, forcing him to confront the hollowness of a leadership style that had relied on domination rather than inspiration. In quiet moments of introspection, he began to see that his identity, so carefully constructed around control, had blinded him to the possibility of genuine connection. His encounters with Malik's quiet defiance had sown seeds of doubt that grew into an internal reckoning. Though the path toward redemption was not clearly marked, Xavier struggled to reconcile his past with a more enlightened future, hinted at the possibility that even the hardest hearts could be softened by the transformative power of empathy and change. This period of rebirth at Crescent Heights High was not without its challenges. The old order, though increasingly marginalized, did not vanish overnight. There were still moments when the ghosts of past prejudices reared their heads, moments when familiar voices, steeped in tradition and resistance, would murmur in the corridors or linger in the corners of the cafeteria. Yet these remnants of the past were now met with a quiet defiance from those who had tasted the promise of a new beginning. Each time an echo of intolerance arose, it was countered by a chorus of voices that spoke of unity and respect. The shifting tides were not uniform or instantaneous, but they were persistent. A slow, inexorable current that carried the promise of a truly reborn community. Among the many expressions of this transformation was a series of collaborative projects initiated by students and teachers alike. The art club, once a refuge for those seeking an outlet from the rigidity of school life, had evolved into a community center where creative expression became a vehicle for social change. Under Malik's quiet guidance, young artists worked together on murals that depicted the struggles and triumphs of their shared experiences. These projects were not simply about creating beautiful images. They were about reclaiming a narrative that had long been dominated by exclusion and fear. In the strokes of vibrant paint and the careful crafting of each detail, students expressed a vision of a future where every individual story was valued, a future where differences were celebrated rather than hidden. The spirit of collaboration extended beyond the artistic realm. In the realm of academics and extracurricular activities, students began to form new alliances that crossed the old boundaries of cliques and rivalry. Debate clubs, science fairs, and cultural exchanges became fertile grounds for innovation and mutual respect. Conversations that once revolved around superficial social standing now delved into deep questions about identity, justice, and the role of community in shaping a better future. Every interaction, every shared project was a step toward dismantling the old systems of power that had long confined the school to a narrow definition of success. As the transformation deepened, even the physical space of Crescent Heights High seemed to respond. The long-forgotten corners of the school were revitalized with new purpose. Classrooms became vibrant hubs of discussion. Hallways were adorned with student art and inspirational quotes, and the once gloomy cafeteria was filled with the buzz of ideas and the warmth of genuine human connection. Key. The school's very architecture, steeped in decades of tradition, now bore subtle marks of the new era. A mural here, a refurbished common area there, each sign a testament to the collective will to create an environment where every student could thrive. In the midst of these changes, Malik continued to be a quiet force of nature. His calm, unassuming presence had evolved into a symbol of possibility, a reminder that even in a world marred by long-standing injustice, one person's courage could spark a revolution of the spirit. Yet Malik's journey was not one of self-aggrandizement. He remained humble, always mindful of the silent struggles and quiet victories that defined his path. His focus was never on being hailed as a hero, but rather on nurturing the seeds of change in every heart he encountered. In every conversation, every shared glance, Malik embodied a vision of what the future could be. A future where strength was measured not by dominance, but by compassion, where every individual had the opportunity to be heard and valued. As the days turned into weeks and the spring sun began to warm the once frosted grounds of the school, the transformation at Crescent Heights High became a beacon for the broader community. Local media took note of the dramatic turnaround. A school once synonymous with division now stood as a testament to the power of collective action and the resilience of the human spirit. Parents, community leaders, and even alumni returned to witness the rebirth of an institution that had long been a symbol of conformity. The news stories, laden with hope and celebration, spoke of a quiet revolution that had begun in the hearts of the students and spread outward like ripples on a still pond. In this newly reimagined landscape, every element of the school life was imbued with a sense of purpose. Classrooms were transformed into sanctuaries of learning and dialogue, where students engaged with their subjects in ways that transcended rote memorization. Teachers embraced innovative methods that encourage critical thinking and empathy, creating an educational environment where every voice mattered. Extracurricular activities flourished as students, no longer shackled by the constraints of an oppressive social order, explored their passions with unabashed enthusiasm. The vibrant tapestry of the school community was enriched by the diversity of thought and experience, each individual contributing to a shared vision of progress. Xavier Monroe's journey during this period was as tumultuous as it was introspective. The erosion of his once unassailable authority forced him to confront the realities of his own shortcomings and the impact of his actions. In moments of solitude, he wrestled with the painful realization that power built on fear was ephemeral, a fragile construct destined to crumble in the face of genuine human connection. Though the road to redemption was uncertain and fraught with internal conflict, Xavier began to tentatively explore the possibility of change. In quiet conversations with mentors and even with those he had once considered his adversaries, he sought to understand the true nature of strength and leadership, a lesson that came not from exerting control, but from inspiring others to rise above their own limitations. The shifting tides at Crescent Heights High were not confined solely to the walls of the school. They rippled outward into the surrounding community, inspiring a broader dialogue about inclusion, justice, and the power of unity. The success of the Crescent Unity Festival and the many collaborative projects became a model for other institutions grappling with similar challenges. The school's transformation was hailed as a groundbreaking example of how even the most entrenched systems of inequality could be dismantled through the simple, yet profound, act of believing in a better future. As the new academic year loomed on the horizon, Crescent Heights High stood as a living testament to the enduring power of change. The echoes of past struggles were honored not as burdens to be carried, but as lessons that had paved the way for a reborn community, one where every student, regardless of background, was empowered to forge their own destiny. In this space of renewal, the promise of a brighter tomorrow was not a distant dream, but an imminent reality, nurtured by the collective heart of a community that had finally learned to listen to the quiet voice of its own potential. In the end, the transformation of Crescent Heights High was more than just a change in policy or practice. It was a metamorphosis of the human spirit. The once divided corridors now pulsed with the vibrant energy of a united community, and the very air seemed charged with the promise of possibility. For every student who had once lived in fear of being silenced, there now existed the hope of being heard. And for every heart that had long been conditioned to accept injustice, there bloomed the courage to demand something better. The shifting tides had ushered in an era where strength was no longer measured by dominance but by compassion, where unity was forged not through coercion but through understanding, and where the rebirth of a school was a reflection of the rebirth of its people. As Crescent Heights High embraced this new chapter, every moment became a testament to the transformative power of resilience, empathy, and the quiet, unwavering conviction that the future, indeed, belonged to those brave enough to dream it into being. In the final light of a transformative era, Crescent Heights High stood as a living monument to what could be achieved when courage met compassion. Malik Johnson, once a quiet newcomer whose silent defiance challenged the status quo, had become the embodiment of an unstoppable spirit, a beacon of hope in a place long defined by fear and exclusion. As the school's vibrant new rhythm settled into everyday life, the air itself seemed to vibrate with the promise of a brighter tomorrow, one forged not in the fires of conflict, but in the gentle persistence of unity and respect. The journey had led every student, teacher, and even the administration to a profound realization that true strength lies in the willingness to change, to break free from the constraints of old hierarchies, and embrace the richness of each individual's story. Malik's influence had transcended the physical battles of the past. It had reshaped hearts and minds, planting the seeds of a future where every voice could be heard, no matter how quiet. In this reimagined community, the legacy of pain and division was replaced by an enduring commitment to growth, empathy, and shared dreams. At the heart of this new dawn was the recognition that transformation is a collective journey. Parents, community leaders, and even those who had once clung to the old ways found themselves inspired by the tangible change that had taken root within the school's walls. Local media celebrated Crescent Heights High as a symbol of renewal, a place where the scars of yesterday were honored not as marks of failure, but as lessons that paved the way for a more inclusive and resilient future. The narrative that had once confined the school to a cycle of intimidation and submission was rewritten by the courage of a single individual whose quiet determination sparked a movement. For Malik, the path forward was not about basking in the glow of newfound fame or basking in accolades. It was about nurturing the ongoing evolution of a community that had learned to embrace its own diversity. His days were spent not only perfecting his art in the sanctuary of the school's revitalized art club, but also engaging in dialogues that bridged generational and cultural divides. He became a mentor and a confidant to many, a steady presence who gently encouraged others to discover their inner strength. His example proved that the most powerful change comes not from overwhelming force, but from an unshakable belief in one's inherent worth and the unrelenting pursuit of justice through peaceful means. Xavier Monroe, whose reign had once been synonymous with fear and control, now faced a turning point of his own making. Stripped of the authority that had defined his earlier years, he grappled with the realization that his past actions had contributed to a legacy of isolation and regret. In quiet moments of reflection, Xavier began to understand that redemption was possible, not through further domination, but by seeking to rebuild the bridges he had so carelessly burned. His journey toward self-reckoning was fraught with challenges, yet it symbolized the potential for every person to reinvent themselves. In his tentative efforts to reach out and learn from those he once oppressed, Xavier offered a glimpse of the transformative power of humility and the courage to change. Throughout the community, the effects of this metamorphosis rippled outward, creating new opportunities for dialogue, cooperation, and creative expression. The Crescent Unity Initiative, a student-led program born from the very spirit of collaboration that had blossomed within the school, became a model for other institutions facing similar challenges. Workshops, cultural exchanges, and community service projects were not only celebrated for their immediate impact, but were also seen as the building blocks of a sustainable, inclusive future. These endeavors, driven by the passion and determination of young leaders, demonstrated that the journey toward social justice is ongoing, dynamic, and deeply rooted in the belief that every individual has the power to contribute to the common good. In classrooms, the air was filled with a renewed sense of purpose. Lessons became opportunities for open, honest conversations about the past and hopes for the future. Teachers like Mr. Ellis and Miss Carter, who had long nurtured the seeds of change within their students, now witnessed an unprecedented level of engagement. The students, empowered by the transformation they had experienced, began to challenge not only the old curriculum, but also the underlying assumptions that had once kept them silent. This intellectual awakening was not marked by loud declarations or radical rhetoric, but by a persistent, thoughtful questioning of what it meant to be part of a community. In the process, a culture of critical thinking and empathetic dialogue took root, a culture that promised to extend far beyond the confines of the school. As the final days of the academic year approached, a sense of anticipation filled Crescent Heights High. The promise of a new beginning was not an abstract ideal, but a tangible reality evidenced by every smile, every shared moment of understanding, and every collaborative effort that unfolded in its revitalized spaces. Malik's quiet revolution had demonstrated that change was not only possible, but inevitable when hearts were open and minds were willing to embrace new ways of thinking. The once oppressive silence of the corridors had been replaced by an uplifting symphony of voices united in purpose, a chorus that sang of resilience, hope, and the unbreakable bonds of community. In that remarkable convergence of determination and compassion, the future of Crescent Heights High was reborn. The transformative power of a single, unwavering spirit had transcended the boundaries of fear, inspiring a legacy that would echo through generations. The school, once a bastion of conformity and division, now stood as a shining example of what could be achieved when individuals dared to dream beyond the limitations imposed upon them. As dawn broke on the first day of the new academic year, the campus was bathed in the gentle light of possibility. The legacy of the past was not forgotten, but it had been reinterpreted. A reminder that even the deepest wounds could serve as the foundation for healing and renewal. In the quiet moments of that new morning, as students gathered with hopeful eyes and eager hearts, the spirit of Crescent Heights High affirmed a timeless truth that every obstacle, no matter how insurmountable it may seem, can be overcome when united by the unyielding conviction that tomorrow will be brighter. In this new era, the unstoppable force of collective transformation was evident in every shared glance and every determined step forward. It was a testament to the enduring power of resilience and the quiet revolution that had begun with one young man's unwavering resolve. The dawn of a brighter tomorrow was not just an abstract promise, it was a reality unfolding before their very eyes, a reality in which every silent voice was heard, every individual was valued, and every challenge was met with the steadfast courage of a community reborn. The story of Malik Johnson at Crescent Heights High is a powerful testament to the transformative power of quiet strength and unwavering resilience. At its core, it's a narrative about how one individual's steadfast commitment to self-respect can catalyze profound change, not only within themselves, but also within an entire community. Malik's journey from being a seemingly invisible newcomer to becoming an unintentional leader who redefined strength and courage is a reflection of the potential that lies within each of us to challenge oppressive systems and inspire positive transformation. When Malik first arrived at Crescent Heights High, he did not fit into any of the pre-established social molds. His calm demeanor and quiet presence immediately set him apart in a school long governed by unspoken rules and rigid hierarchies. Xavier Monroe, the self-proclaimed ruler of the school, viewed Malik's indifference as a threat, a silent rebellion against the dominance he had maintained for years. Initially, Malik's refusal to conform made him a target. Xavier's entourage, fueled by their leader's need for control, attempted to subdue Malik through intimidation and force. Yet, what they did not understand was that Malik was not a typical victim. His strength did not come from physical prowess alone, but from a deep inner discipline cultivated through years of silent battles and personal growth. The first turning point occurred when Malik chose not to retaliate with aggression during his initial confrontations. Instead, he demonstrated that true power comes from maintaining composure even when provoked. This quiet defiance was not the response his aggressors expected, and it unsettled them more than any direct confrontation could. In a world where dominance was displayed through force, Malik's calm stood as an unspoken challenge to the very foundation of their power. As Malik continued to move through the school with his head held high, refusing to react to petty provocations, the students around him began to notice something extraordinary. His resilience, his refusal to stoop to the level of his bullies, became a silent declaration that strength could be rooted in integrity rather than intimidation. This sparked curiosity and eventually admiration among his peers. Malik's presence began to erode the social structures that had once seemed so immutable, revealing them to be fragile and inherently flawed. When the bullying escalated to a physical confrontation, Malik's response was not one of reckless violence, but of precise, calculated self-defense. His ability to neutralize aggression without becoming aggressive himself served as a profound statement about the nature of true strength. By maintaining control of his own reactions, he demonstrated that real power lies not in dominating others, but in mastering oneself. This pivotal moment shattered the illusion of Xavier's control and marked the beginning of a cultural shift within the school. As Malik's actions continued to resonate, other students found the courage to step forward, challenging the oppressive norms that had long dictated their lives. The quiet revolution he had sparked grew into a collective movement. The once rigid social lines began to blur as students from different backgrounds came together, inspired by Malik's unwavering stance against bullying and injustice. The Crescent Unity Festival became a physical manifestation of this change, a celebration of diversity and a commitment to fostering a community built on mutual respect and collaboration. Even Xavier, whose identity had been so deeply intertwined with maintaining power through fear, found himself grappling with the collapse of his authority. Confronted with the consequences of his actions and the undeniable impact of Malik's quiet defiance, Xavier began to reflect on the emptiness of his former approach. Through a painful yet transformative process, he came to understand that true leadership is rooted not in control, but in the ability to inspire and support others. This realization marked his own journey toward redemption as he began to rebuild his relationships on a foundation of humility rather than dominance. Malik, meanwhile, remained grounded, never allowing his growing influence to alter his core principles. He did not seek validation or leadership, but naturally became a guiding figure through his consistent actions and quiet determination. His story, far from being just a tale of overcoming adversity, became an enduring lesson in how authenticity and inner strength can fundamentally alter even the most entrenched systems of oppression. The transformation at Crescent Heights High extended beyond the school walls, impacting the broader community. Parents, educators, and community leaders observed how a single act of courage had blossomed into a widespread commitment to change. Malik's influence reached not just those who had been marginalized, but also those who once enforced the oppressive norms. It became clear that the most profound changes often come not from grand gestures, but from the consistent, deliberate choices made in everyday interactions. The story of Malik Johnson teaches us that true power lies in the ability to remain authentic despite external pressures. In a world that often equates dominance with strength, Malik's journey serves as a reminder that standing firm in one's values can inspire others to do the same. His quiet resistance against bullying and discrimination encourages us to think differently about how we respond to adversity. Instead of reacting with anger or fear, we can choose to demonstrate resilience and kindness, allowing our actions to speak louder than words. In our daily lives, we can apply Malik's lessons by refusing to be shaped by negativity. When faced with challenges, we can remain calm, focused, and committed to our principles. Whether dealing with workplace conflicts, social injustices, or personal struggles, we can choose to lead by example, showing that real strength is measured not by how much power we can exert over others, but by how steadfastly we hold on to our integrity. By refusing to be defined by external circumstances, we can become agents of change, just as Malik did, quietly, consistently, and powerfully. The story also reminds us that community transformation begins with individual actions. Malik never set out to be a leader, but his quiet courage inspired others to question their own assumptions and take responsibility for creating a more inclusive environment. We too can make a difference by being mindful of our actions, standing up for what is right, and showing compassion even in the face of hostility. Each of us has the potential to ignite change, no matter how small the initial spark may seem. As we reflect on Malik's journey, let us carry forward the lesson that true leadership is not about asserting control, but about empowering others to rise above fear and prejudice. Let us be inspired to challenge unfair practices and support those who need a voice. By embracing the quiet power within us, we can foster environments where respect and kindness prevail. If this story moved you or made you think differently about strength and resilience, consider supporting our channel by subscribing. Your support helps us continue to share stories that inspire and challenge the way we see the world. Together, we can create more content that highlights the transformative power of courage, empathy, and unity. Hit the subscribe button, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and stay tuned for more tales of real change and personal growth. Thank you for being part of our community. Your presence makes a difference.